Astraeos is the first new exclusive map in Ark Survival Ascended, and it's been out for quite a while now, and it's been a really popular one since it came out. It's made by Nicatus, who is a modder. He's the same person who made Fjordur, and he worked on Valguero as well. And of course, Fjordur was one of the fan favorite maps on Ark Survival Evolved, and one of the best maps on that game. It was really good, especially because it was like the last map added to the game, and I think it was one of the bests on there. But the point is, the same person, Nicatus, came back and created Astraeos, and then it was added to the official game, originally being a mod map, but now it's an official DLC for Ark Survival Ascended for $15, and you get, of course, the entire map, and the map currently isn't even finished yet, but we'll get into that later. But even with the map not being finished, it seems like it's one of the best maps to ever be in Ark before. And of course, I would like to get to that in detail and why I think that, as well as compare it to some of the previous maps that would have been considered the best, which for me would have been Ragnarok. That was basically my favorite map on Ark Survival Evolved, but also a very close second to that would have been Fjordur as well. That was also an amazing map, but I really did enjoy Ragnarok, and that's still one of my favorite maps. Ragnarok was one of my favorites, and has been for, like, ever since it came out, basically. I've really enjoyed Ragnarok, and I think one of the reasons is, one, when it came out, it was the biggest map in the entire game, and it added creatures from the island and Scorched Earth, which at the time was, like, all the creatures in the game. So you had almost everything on one map, and of course, nowadays, it doesn't really have all of the creatures, per se, on one map. But I don't think that is what makes a map good, is just having a bunch of creatures on there. Because some people will say that some maps are better just because they have access to more creatures. And to me, it's more about the map experience than the creatures are on it. Or just, you know, the map itself, what it looks like, what biomes it has, and is it fun to explore. Because some maps just aren't like that, but they do have access to a bunch of creatures. And then, you know, for some people, that's like all they really care about, which if that's all you care about, then that's fine. But, you know, for me, I've always cared about, you know, how fun is the map to play, what does it look like, what are the biomes on there. Like, one of my favorite maps was always Scorched Earth, which a lot of people don't like that much, but I always just thought it was a completely unique experience compared to everything else, because you're surviving in a desert and you have to do things completely different on that map, and it's not like any other map. And Aberration's like that too, and Aberration is one of like the fan favorite maps. But like for the same reasons I like Aberration, I like Scorched Earth. They're both like completely unique experiences that are nothing else like you would find in Ark before. But those are like the story maps. So of course we need to get back to the custom maps, which are like the mod maps added to official. And those ones feel like the main maps where you'd actually like create your main world on, where they just have access to a bunch of things from the game, and you can kind of just play with all the dinosaurs and just have like a normal Ark experience, I guess, but on a really awesome map. I think the Center was like the first custom map, but I wasn't really a big fan of it because it kind of felt like, well, there was no unique creatures on it, which I was just saying it's about the map experience. But even then, I don't feel like it felt like the island with like less stuff on it, because I could just play the island, and the island has access to all the boss fights and stuff. I really do enjoy the island, but the Center, it has all the same creatures. Of course, now it does have the Shastasaurus, but nobody uses that. But like on the Center, there's none of the boss fights or anything. The only thing that's different is the map itself, which the map actually does look pretty cool, but I've just never really cared about it that much. Also, there's not really that much of like diversity in the biomes of the Center either. They did introduce the volcanic biome, which I do like, even though it did feel kind of, it is outdated now, especially in Ark Survival Evolved. In Ark Survival Ascended, they changed it to like a jungle volcanic biome, which I'm not really the biggest fan of, and I know most people aren't really the biggest fan of either. And then they also brought the redwoods in, which is kind of similar to the redwoods on the island, but it does have this really cool cliffside, which I gotta admit is pretty dope. The Center does have some cool landscapes overall, so I don't dislike it. I actually do like the Center, but I think some of the other maps are better. Like, I way prefer Ragnarok, obviously, and, you know, Fjordur is a lot better. Lost Island, I think, is way cooler than the Center. I think there's just a lot more to offer in those other maps, especially with this one being older, and this one not having any new creatures. Like, I did say it's not all about the creatures, but it definitely does help a lot when you have some of the unique DLC creatures, or even new creatures that are entirely new to the map, which the center doesn't have any, other than, like I said earlier, the Shastasaurus on Ark Survival Ascended, but nobody really uses that one. But Ark Survival Evolved didn't even have a new creature to it. It was just the map with all of the island creatures on it, and some of them missing, like the Rhinognatha on me there, but I will be judging it off the Ark Ascended version, which has more stuff on it, but still never really been my favorite. But of course, getting back to Ragnarok, and I wanted to talk about Ragnarok because it was my favorite map before Astraeos, and I wanted to compare the two mainly. But I also wanted, talk about the center and some other maps and say why I thought Ragnarok was better than those maps. And one, mainly because of all the new biomes. Of course, there's also like ruins too, which this map was like the first to have some really dope ruins, like the castle and stuff. The center did have the best ruins, I think, up to that point, but I think Ragnarok really outdid it in that area. And like I said, mainly when it comes to the map itself, it's got a ton of unique biomes, and they're all really fun to explore. It's not just the same biome going through most of the map, as well as it's like really open as well. You can actually go and explore it. You can see everything from the skies, I think, which is quite nice. Like some maps that are just like covered in forest, like you can't even really get into. Like a lot of Valguero is just jungle and redwoods biome, so you don't even really get to see a lot of it because it's just so covered in trees, which I think obviously there doesn't need to be a lot of forested areas, but I like how they're kind of spread out in Ragnarok, and there's a lot of open areas where you can actually go and explore a lot. Ragnarok also just had some of my favorite biomes introduced, like the grassland biome or the like hills biome, and then there was also like the area with all the pine trees that was pretty dope, as well as like the desert area that has the pine trees in it. I think it looks really cool. Ragnarok also just had a bunch of different base locations. Like there's like one of the first maps where they just had like a ton of flat areas where you could build that didn't really look out of place, but like just made for awesome base locations. Like they really designed areas that were just flat for you to build on, which the maps previously didn't really have like massive base locations like that. And this map also was the first custom map to introduce a new creature, which was the Griffin, which is still one of my favorite creatures in the game. It's awesome. So Ragnarok also has griffins on it, and of course lots of other creatures in future maps would be like real world dinosaurs, which I do like, but I feel like having a real world dinosaur on the map, it kind of doesn't feel like it's exclusive to that. I mean, like, I feel like maps like have like the Andrewsarchus on Fjordur. Like the Andrewsarchus could be like on the island and it would make perfect sense, which I mean is kind of just like a nitpick for me, but the Griffin feels like it kind of fits Ragnarok, and you wouldn't want to have the Griffin on the island because the island's mainly just prehistoric creatures. Ragnarok was also the first map to introduce its own mini bosses with the Ice Queen Deathworm and the Lava Golem, and these were in caves, and they haven't really done anything like it since, except for on, of course, Fjordur and Astraeos, but we'll get to those later. But I really liked that part of the map. The only problem was the final boss, which was just the dragon and the manticore in a boss arena together, was kind of lame. And if you were someone who also liked the boss fighting parts of the game, that might be a problem. I suppose, of course, when like the map first came out, I feel like people really didn't have a problem with that. But as these newer maps come out, there's a lot of boss content, especially in Fjordur, and comparing that to Ragnarok, it just doesn't really feel as good. Of course, in Ark Ascended, they did add the Ice Wyvern boss, so I think that does help it quite a bit. But they didn't have that in Ark Survival Evolved, but they do have it in Ark Ascended now, so I am going to count the Ark Ascended version. But the last map for Ark Survival Evolved I want to talk about before we talk about Astraeos and comparing it is Fjordur, because I'll be comparing Ragnarok to Fjordur a bunch, and honestly, these ones are like the top two for me, and they could really almost be like exchangeable. Maybe even Fjordur might be better for me on a different day, but I really do enjoy Ragnarok too. But Fjordur was also completely different. What I liked about Fjordur is none of the biomes were like from any maps before. The main biome that you would go throughout on like the mainland was like that green pine forest kind of looking one. and then obviously the cliffs were completely different. Like, I like how they just didn't use any biomes from previous maps. And, of course, one of the things people like about Fjordur is it has almost all the creatures from Ark Survival Evolved on this map. And I feel like it puts them in the map in a really, like, nice way. Because some other maps, like, they just have a bunch of biomes from other maps. Like, Valguero, for example, like, they just have a Aberration area that's like a carbon copy of Aberration. Like, if you just took a picture of that from Valguero, you couldn't even tell the difference from Aberration, and then they did that just to have Aberration creatures in there. I don't really like when maps do that, like they just add a carbon copy of a biome just to have the creatures there. On Fjordur, that was like completely different because all the biomes were new, but like they fit the creatures in from other DLC maps in really well. So like in Asgard, they have like that purple biome, that purple swamp biome that really fit the Shadow Mains. Like, they didn't just have the Rockwell Innards biome or the Rockwell's Garden biome just copied in. They didn't do anything like that. They just had like that area for those kind of creatures, and they did that with like all the creatures that they added on here as well. And for that reason, I feel like it was really awesome. You're exploring all these brand new biomes, but they have all the creatures still from all the other maps, and they still fit in really well, because they managed to make like new biomes that these creatures would fit into. As well as Fjordur has all those bosses. It's got 3 custom bosses, and then it has the bosses from the island with their own unique arenas. So it brings old bosses back, but it gives them a new arena, and like I said, they're not the main bosses, they're just part there, and they have 3 new custom mini bosses. And then finally they have the Fjordur boss that you are working up to. So lots of boss content, all kinds of new creatures, all kinds of new biomes. And Fjordur, when it comes to the map size, it's not as big as Ragnarok, but I think if you include like the 3 other realms, then it might be. But that was also something cool they did. They did something completely unique, which I like when maps do, is it has 3 unique realms that you can teleport to, and then they each have their own different things. So you've got like the frozen one, I forgot what it's called, Jotunheim, I think, where it's like super cold, but it's like an Arctic biome, but like there's like red grass and trees there, so it's like not just a generic Arctic biome. And then they got the one that's like a jungle, or it's not really a jungle, it's like a massive tree. It feels like Aberration, but it's completely different. So like I said, all these biomes just have like completely unique feels to them, which is something I really like in the map. And then obviously implementing DLC creatures and other creatures in there without just having a copy of another biome, not making it feel any different. Fjordur and I think Ragnarok 2 feel completely different from any other map that I've played on when it comes to the biomes. And they, even if they do have a biome from another map, they manage to make it different in some sort of way. So the reason for me yapping about why Ragnarok and Fjordur were so good, and the center I didn't really like as much, is I think Astraeos basically does all of the things that I said I liked about all those maps, like perfectly, or why I like an Orc map so much and how it does it just absolutely amazingly. First off, it's the biggest Ark map by a mile. It's absolutely huge, which I do like some big Ark maps, but if there's the things you're exploring in the Ark map is pretty boring, then that doesn't really matter that much. But the thing is, Astraeos is completely different. All of the biomes are completely unique. There's not like a single area. Well, I guess there kind of is with like the Arctic redwoods, but other than that, it all feels just completely different compared to every other map. Most of it is, I know it's like a Greek themed map, but like the biomes, it's like this kind of like grassland area, so kind of like the Highlands from Ragnarok, but it's all like the white cliffs, so it's kind of like the white cliffs from Valguero in that sense. It's like a mix of the two, and I think that biome is really cool. And a lot of the biomes like build on that, so they're like that, but like one area is like that biome, but like there's a cherry blossom tree forest, and there's another forest that's like very small. It's like these like brown kind of trees that are like something you've never seen in the game before. But another thing I like about Astraeos is it's very open. Like I was saying with Ragnarok, where there's a lot of open space. It's not just like there's a ton of forest covering the map, so you can't even explore because it's so dense, and then you try and go in the forest and get attacked by everything. Like this area, it's very open, so even when you're flying around on the map, which is how most maps are, when you're just flying around, you still feel like you're in the action a little bit, because you can still see everything that's going on the ground because it's so open. But you know, it's not like flat where it's just like some mod maps where it's just like completely flat and like it's just boring. Like they can manage to keep it to where there's huge open spaces, but they still feel like they're meant to be there. They don't feel out of place or anything, which I think is awesome. It makes for cool base locations or exploring. I just prefer the open kind of style maps rather than just it being covered in forests where you can't even like get to explore everything. When it's open like this, I feel like the entire map is super easy for me to go and explore, and so many things for me to find without just having to like go for hours looking in a forest that's completely dense and full of just creatures attacking me constantly. Means I can also see all the creatures too very easily out in the open. But obviously, all of that's in these new biomes that they have. And something I also love about Astraeos is the height. There's absolutely massive mountains, which if you were to compare Astraeos to literally every other map, it just makes the mountains that were in there look tiny. Like one area is Mount Olympus, where it just goes super high in the air above the clouds, and you've got this giant fortress on the top, or not a fortress, it's like a coliseum. Not a coliseum either. I don't know why I keep just picking the completely wrong terms for these buildings, but you know, I'm just gonna stop there. I'm gonna stop embarrassing myself. But you know what? There's these giant structures on here. I'm not gonna say ruins because they're completely intact, which is something I like about Astraeos too. And they did it in Fjordur too. Is they have these buildings that aren't ruins. They're like completely unique buildings that I guess might have just been abandoned recently. They're not like super old and destroyed. Like they're still intact, which is pretty cool. And you can even turn them into your own bases. But like I was saying with the biomes, this biome you've been seeing here, like these black cliffs, and then it's not like green grass, it's more like it's got like a yellow tint to it. This biome's really cool too. I really like it. This is more of like the cold biome, so you'll find like mammoths and all kinds of stuff here. So it's not just like an Arctic biome. They do have Arctic biomes, which I like, but they're kind of smaller and fewer and farther in between. And then there's the swamp biome, which on most maps would just be either like the swamp from the island, but of course on Fjordur they gave a completely unique swamp biome, and on Astraeos the swamp biome is also completely unique. This is one that I actually want to live in, which is very impressive to say, if you can make a swamp that actually makes you want to live in there, because it looks really awesome. You've got these gigantic like purple trees that come down, and something that's completely unique too is this swamp biome is where the wyverns are. Usually they're like in a volcanic biome and just a like wyvern trench that's like the scar, but this one, it doesn't really have a scar. It like goes into this giant swamp cave, and that's where the wyverns are. So you know, something also completely unique there too. It's not just like a generic wyvern scar cave, which I mean those are really cool to have, but you know, this one actually gives a different take on the wyvern trench, which is pretty awesome. Astraeos even has its own aberration area, which is just like a small, I guess it's a decently sized cave that definitely looks a little bit different than the aberration area. And I do like this area too. The reason I don't like the Volguero one and I like this one is the Volguero one is like a major part of the map. And every time I say I don't really like Volguero that much, people are like, well, it has an entire aberration area. I'm like, well, if that's the whole point of the map is just like a carbon copy of aberration, then I could just go play aberration and have the exact same experience. But this one, it feels more like a bonus. Like it just has this small little aberration area where you can go tame some of the extra creatures, and it still looks a little bit unique. Like it has a little bit, I mean, it does look pretty similar to the aberrant like fertile region for aberration, but it's different in its own way too. It's a lot more like forested. Then there's the volcanic biome too, which of course this one's completely unique compared to any other volcanic biome. First of all, it's like one of the best looking, especially on Ark Ascended right now. All the other, I mean, the Ragnarok one was pretty good, but this one I think is even better than the Ragnarok one, and especially because it brings in the extinction creatures. This is basically like the wastelands from Extinction, but completely different because it has what would normally be the corrupted creatures, but in here they're called lightning creatures. You have like orbital supply drops from Extinction, but they're in different forms, like these giant lightning rods, as well as the element veins that are yellow. So you have like all of the Extinction stuff, but they didn't just, you know, make the wasteland biome and plop it in here and put corrupted creatures in here. He made the volcanic biome and then put extinction creatures on there, which gives like a interesting spin to a volcanic biome, as well as being able to add extinction creatures in a unique way that's not just like adding a wasteland to your map and then putting the corrupted creatures on there just to have corrupted creatures. Like, it feels like they actually fit in pretty well here on this volcanic biome, and it's a really cool idea that I do like. And they also have a different variant of the King Titan that spawns on this map too, so you can be flying by this thing and then the King Titan will be walking around. This one's called like Theranos or something, and then it will spawn like once every day, and you have a chance to actually fight him and defeat him, which I think is really dope. And with all that being said about Astraeos, it's still not even finished. There's an entire desert biome that's being worked on, which so far seems like it's going to be really cool. I'm excited to see that. But even without the whole desert biome and a whole another island that's coming, I still think this one is the best Ark map. I think it's really great. I've been enjoying playing on it so much. There's still so much to explore. And I didn't even mention the 2 unique bosses on here either. They have 2 completely custom-made bosses that aren't just reskins of other bosses. They have like a giant orc dude, and then they have Medusa, which is like one of the hardest bosses in the game. And then you have like the mini bosses of like the Daedons and stuff. So you got a lot to do on this map. So many creatures to tame. And I forgot to mention, but it has almost every DLC creature, and they fit in really well because, like I said, for Fjordur, they put them into the biomes that would fit them, and they're not just like copying other biomes from other maps and then just sticking the creatures in there just to have them. Like, they all feel like they fit really well on this map. But anyway, that's going to be it for this video. If you guys did enjoy or agree, make sure to leave a like and also subscribe. Let me know what you think about Astraeos, if it's your favorite, or if you still think Fjordur or Ragnarok are better. Let me know why in the comments and then down below. But thanks for watching, and bye.